All right, so something happened today that I need you to understand not as a headline, but as a turning point. Because what just played out between Mark Carney and Donald Trump in full public view in real time, with markets watching and diplomats watching and every strategic planner and every allied capital watching, was not another loud exchange between two leaders who don't like each other. It was a demonstration. A live, unscripted demonstration of what happens when the most powerful intimidation apparatus in modern politics meets someone who was ready for it. And the result was not what Washington expected. It was not what Trump's advisors planned for. And based on everything we're hearing from inside the West Wing tonight, it was not something they know how to fix. Let me walk you through it, because the surface story, two leaders exchanging sharp words, is not the story. The story is the mechanics of what happened beneath the words, the psychology, the strategy, the sequence, and why, by the end of this exchange, the balance of initiative in the most consequential bilateral relationship in North America had measurably, visibly shifted. Here's where it starts. Trump did what Trump does. He made a move designed to project dominance, bold, public, loud, fast. The intent was unmistakable. Force, speed, overwhelming presence. The theory behind it was the theory that has powered every Trump confrontation for a decade. Apply enough pressure, speak with enough intensity, generate enough noise, and the other side will either fold, soften, or come to the table negotiating from a position of fear. That's the playbook. It's been the playbook since 2015, and it has worked over and over against opponents who responded the way the playbook assumes they will, with panic, with rushed counterstatements, with emotional reactions that can be reframed as weakness, with the kind of visible anxiety that confirms the intimidation is working and invites more of it. Carney did none of those things. And that's where this story becomes important, not as political theater, as strategic analysis. Carney responded with the one thing that deflates a pressure campaign faster than any insult ever could. Calm, measured, precise, strategic composure, delivered with the credibility of someone who has spent a career managing crises that other people created. At the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial collapse, at the Bank of England during Brexit. This is a man whose professional existence has been defined by staying steady while the room is on fire. And tonight, that professional identity became a geopolitical weapon. Here's what he did that was so effective. He didn't match Trump's volume. That would have meant fighting on Trump's terrain that's designed to reward chaos. He didn't retreat. That would have confirmed the pressure was working. He didn't escalate with counter threats. That would have given Trump's team something to point to and say, see, they're panicking. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He reframed the entire exchange. He turned it from a story about Trump projecting strength into a story about Trump miscalculating. He converted the pressure into evidence of overreach. He made the threat itself the problem. Not what Canada might do in response, but what Trump's aggression was costing everyone who had to deal with its consequences. And that reframing, that shift from Trump is strong to Trump just made an expensive mistake, is the thing that cannot be undone. Because once the question in the room changes from how far will Trump push to did Trump just create a problem he can't control, the entire dynamic inverts. The intimidator becomes the source of instability. The target becomes the voice of reason. And every observer, investors, diplomats, allied governments, corporate executives, even Trump's own advisors, starts recalculating not whether to support the pressure, but how to contain it. Now let me explain why the mechanics of this matter so much. Because this is where most political analysis stops and where the real insight begins. Trump's political method depends on rhythm. He strikes first. He defines the terms. He forces everyone else to respond to him. That grants him tempo. Tempo builds intimidation. Intimidation produces concessions. It's a cycle. And when it works brilliantly. He's used it against political opponents, against foreign leaders, against members of his own party, against media organizations. The cycle works because most people, when confronted with that level of aggressive unpredictability, default to anxiety. And anxiety is the fuel the cycle runs on. Carney broke the cycle. Not by overpowering it, by refusing to participate in it. He slowed the tempo. He replaced anxiety with analysis. He responded not to the emotion of the moment, but to the structural consequences of the action. And he did it in language that spoke directly to the audiences that matter most. Not cable news viewers, not social media commentators, but the institutional actors whose confidence determines whether a strategy is sustainable. Markets, supply chain managers, alliance partners, investors, diplomatic corps, corporate boards. These are the audiences that determine whether a pressure campaign has legs or whether it collapses under its own weight. And Carney, because of who he is, because of his career, because of the credibility he carries in those rooms, spoke directly to them, not with rhetoric, with the language of risk assessment, institutional stability, and long-term consequence. Trump targeted attention. Carney targeted confidence. And in a confrontation between the two, confidence wins. Every time. Because attention is temporary. Confidence is structural. You can dominate a news cycle with attention, but you can only sustain a strategy with confidence. And Carney just took a significant portion of that confidence away from the American side and deposited it on the Canadian side. Now, and this is the part I really need you to focus on, let me tell you what happened behind the scenes. Because the public exchange is only the visible layer. The more consequential story is what this triggered privately. In the rooms where the real calculations happen, the moment Carney responded with composure instead of panic, every stakeholder who had assumed this would be a containable confrontation had to recalculate. Advisors started modeling counter scenarios. Corporate leaders started questioning whether this would affect investment decisions. Supply chain coordinators started envisioning disruptions. Diplomats started making calls. Congressional staff started testing positions. Legal teams started reviewing authorities. And inside the White House itself, based on multiple reports, the conversation shifted, not from how do we press harder to how do we win? From how do we press harder to how do we contain this? That shift from offense to damage control is the clearest indicator of what actually happened today. A pressure campaign became a containment exercise. A planned escalation became a revealed liability. The effort that was supposed to demonstrate American dominance instead demonstrated American overreach. And here's the trap that creates for Trump, a trap that is structural, not just rhetorical. If he escalates further, more pressure, more threats, more aggression, he validates everything Carney just said. He confirms that this isn't a deliberate strategy, but a destabilizing impulse. He gives Carney an even larger platform from which to appear reasonable, measured, and presidential by comparison. And he deepens the market anxiety and diplomatic alienation that his own advisors are reportedly scrambling to manage. If he backs down, if he softens the rhetoric, seeks a quiet off-ramp, pivots to another subject, the perception becomes inescapable. He pushed, he met resistance, he retreated. For a political identity built entirely on never appearing to lose, that is devastating. Not because the substance changes, because the image changes. And in Trump's political universe, image is substance. If he tries to reframe, to change the subject, redirect attention, pretend the exchange didn't happen, he has to do it against the backdrop of a news cycle that has already decided the story. And the story is that Carney stood firm and Trump miscalculated. You can't reframe a story that's already been framed by your opponent, not when the framing was this effective. Those are his options. Escalate and validate Carney. Retreat and appear weak. Reframe and fight a narrative you've already lost control of. There is no comfortable path. There is no clean exit. And the reaction from key actors tells the rest of the story. Business leaders don't like unnecessary instability. Diplomats don't like avoidable deterioration. Institutions don't like unexpected shocks. Alliance partners don't like gratuitous vulnerability. When all of those groups start converging on the same assessment that an action intended to project power has instead made the situation more costly and more dangerous, the leader who launched that action faces a genuine problem. Not a terminal one, but a real one. Because those are the groups that determine endurance. They are the groups that decide whether a bold play is worth supporting for another round. And here's what makes this moment resonate beyond the bilateral relationship. Because what we witness today is not just a Canadian victory or an American setback. It's a demonstration that's being studied everywhere. Every government currently navigating American pressure in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, in the Middle East, just watched a mid-sized power absorb a pressure campaign from the most powerful country on earth and come out stronger on the other side. Not through counter-aggression, not through dramatic retaliation, through composure, through institutional credibility, through the simple act of refusing to perform weakness on command. That is a template, and templates spread. If Carney can do this, if Canada can absorb the blow and redirect it, then every ally, every trading partner, every nation that has ever been on the receiving end of American economic coercion is asking the same question tonight. Can we do that? Can we hold steady? Can we turn pressure into proof of the other side's excess? The answer they're arriving at, watching Canada's currency hold, watching international support consolidate around Ottawa, watching the strategic narrative shift in real time, is yes. If you're disciplined enough, if you're credible enough, if you have the right leader at the right moment, that perception that American pressure can be absorbed and redirected is perhaps the most consequential outcome of today's exchange. Not because it changes the material balance of power. It doesn't. The United States is still vastly larger, vastly stronger, vastly more influential by every conventional measure. But because it changes the psychological balance, the assumption of inevitable compliance, the belief that when Washington pushes, others have no choice but to give way. That assumption cracked today, visibly, in front of everyone who matters. And once it cracks, power becomes more expensive to use. Others test limits more openly. They hedge more aggressively. They diversify faster. They build frameworks and partnerships designed not just to trade efficiently, but to survive politically. Every future threat carries the memory of this moment, the moment a show of force became a self-inflicted wound. So let me tell you where this goes, because the next step now carries even more weight than the first. The most likely path, the one that matches both Trump's political instincts and his advisors' damage control priorities, is managed escalation. More statements, more positioning, more effort to reshape the narrative on terms favorable to Trump's base. But quietly, very quietly, an effort to prevent the kind of actual escalation that would deepen the backlash. Appear tough, proceed carefully. The problem with that path is that it still leaves Carney with the credibility advantage. As long as Carney continues to appear like the more responsible party, the adult in the room, managed escalation bleeds support slowly rather than dramatically. It's a tourniquet, not a cure. The second path is indirect retreat. No dramatic reversal, no public concession, just a gradual shift of attention, a reprioritization, a quiet letting go. This is politically smarter, but psychologically harder, because it means accepting, even privately, that the initial move didn't work. And Trump's political machinery doesn't accept that kind of symbolic defeat gracefully. The third path is the dangerous one. Overcorrection, a bigger action, a harder stance, a more aggressive position designed to erase the perception of having been outmaneuvered. This is the highest risk route because it can transform a bad day into a strategic crisis. And it's the route that history warns us about most urgently, because leaders who feel the need to restore dominance after a public reversal are the leaders most likely to make the kind of escalatory decision that produces consequences no one can control. We don't know which path Trump will choose. We may not know for days. But what we do know, what today made undeniably clear, is that the old assumption no longer holds. The assumption that American pressure automatically produces compliance. The assumption that intimidation translates reliably into leverage. The assumption that being bigger means being in control. Carney didn't just survive today's exchange. He made the exchange itself the evidence for his argument. He didn't just respond to pressure. He made pressure look expensive, reckless, and self-defeating. And he did it without raising his voice. That is what sophisticated statecraft looks like. Not louder, not angrier, not more dramatic, just more precise, more credible, more strategically literate than the person on the other side of the table. Trump reached for dominance and found resistance. He reached for control and found consequences. He reached for a quick tactical win and triggered a broader test of credibility that he did not fully hold by the end of the day. Carney, meanwhile, took the pressure and sent back something far more damaging than anger. He sent back steadiness. He sent back structure. He sent back a message that landed not just in headlines, but in the calculations of every investor, every diplomat, every allied government, and every strategic planner who matters when power is assessed under tension. Sometimes a political confrontation reveals more than either side intended. Sometimes the real story isn't the threat, it's the failed threat. Not the display of power, but the quiet recognition that the display didn't work. And in politics, that recognition can be more dangerous than the display itself. This was not just a tough day for Trump. It was a strategic warning disguised as a public exchange. Carney didn't merely survive the challenge. He made the challenge look careless, expensive, and fragile. And once that happens, the entire equation changes. Trump sought compliance. What he got was a countermove. And now the world is watching what he does when the strongman approach stops working. If you want to stay ahead of every development, the diplomatic shifts, the market reactions, the strategic calculations happening behind closed doors, subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell. Share this with anyone who wants to understand how power actually works when it's tested. Because this story isn't over. It's entering its most consequential phase, and we'll be here for every turn. Talk soon.